Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every
Hello
day.
and welcome into this afternoon edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Dan Holme. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the mid-season identity crisis of this team and ultimately what caused the wheel to wobble for the Capitals in what I'm going to say around the Christmas time of season. Then a bit later, we'll talk about Alex Ovechkin. And I guess it will be a topic of conversation for a while until, well, we finally know. Is he coming back? Is he retiring? Let's dive into it right here because the collapse that we saw this season was, let's call it what it was, systemic and not bad luck. Because the big takeaway right out of the gate, this season didn't slip away. It structurally fell apart. And, let's call it what it is. This wasn't some, they missed by a point, tough luck situation. What we saw was a team that changed identity mid-season, and, well, not in a good way, because early in the year, the Capitals looked legit. 54% shot attempts, top 3. Top 5 in expected goals, driving play, controlling pace. And then, December hits, and it's like someone flipped a switch. The shot attempts dropped to 47%, bottom third. Expected goals fell off. High danger chances gone. And when you take a look at it, that's not a variance. That is a system breakdown. And when you take a look at it, the Capitals got really kind of terrible around December, I guess is what you could say. And because what happened? The defensive structure stayed stuck in the man-to-man. Breakouts became chaotic and zone entries turned into dump and pray hockey. And you watched it. It felt outdated. And here's the take. This isn't about the effort. It's about philosophy. I think they tried to tighten up defensively and, instead choked on their offense, or choked out their offense, rather. And that's coaching, that's structure, and that's identity. And if they don't fix that this summer, we're going to be looking at the same thing next season. And I got to think that Spencer Carberry and his staff are going to learn something from this season, that I know that there are certain structures that are, unique to each individual team, but you got to think this didn't work. To try to run it back next season with that same thought process would be foolish. And also, I think that Chris Patrick, I hope, is going to be active this offseason, that, whether Ovechkin stays or goes, that this team can stand a fighting chance of doing greater things next season. All right, so coming up here after the break, goaltending hid a bigger problem. I'll discuss straight ahead right here. The NBA playoffs are here, where every possession matters, every matchup is magnified, and every game can swing a series. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. The thing I love about it is you can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. The app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. And during the playoffs, that extra insight really matters when you're looking at stars, role players, and key moments. Now listen, our favorite team, the Wizards, they didn't have the season that they were looking for, but you can still have vested interest with FanDuel. So head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. All right, welcome back into this afternoon edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the one thing that the goaltending did on this team, I'm talking primarily about Logan Thompson, is he played so well that he hid some of the bigger problems on this team. But the takeaway in segment 2 here is elite goaltending saved this team from being much, much worse. And this part is going to sting a little bit because if you look at the numbers and why things didn't work out, because if not for truly unreal goaltending, this isn't a near playoff team. This is a bottom 10 team. Straight up, we're talking about performances reminiscent of peak Braden Holtby levels, bailout hockey. And that masked everything. What are those things? Defensive breakdowns, poor puck management, lack of sustained offensive pressure. And, you take a look at it, it's a good thing that they were able to trade for and acquire a guy like Logan Thompson, who in a lot of ways gives off those Braden Holtby vibes. But, you take a look at it, if they don't get the best goaltending since the Holtby era, we're talking about, another team a few years ago that was much, much worse as well. And that's a warning that, if you are solely reliant on your net minding to bail your team out on any given night, that is a warning, because here is the uncomfortable truth. This roster, well, it isn't as close as the standings suggested. And then, you get the special teams, right? The power play looked better late, but let's not kid ourselves. It needed new personnel, new structure, new ideas. And Cole Hudson and Ilya Protas gave it life, but those felt like temporary fixes. And was that even sustainable through a full season? Band-aids. And I'm going to say it because someone has to. Dylan Strome regressed. Not dramatically, not disastrously, but enough that you noticed. And on a team searching for offensive consistency, it matters. So now you're heading into an offseason, where system needs overhaul, special teams needs, reinvention, core players need to re-earn roles. That's not tweaking, that's retooling. So if there's any thought, that this team can run it back with this roster, minus maybe Alex Ovechkin, then I think that's short-sighted. That in yesterday's show, I talked about points exclusively, kind of taking the loser man mentality. If the Capitals had played in the Pacific, then maybe they'd be in the playoffs. Listen, they aren't. The Capitals play in the Metro, in the Eastern Conference, and they were not good enough to stack up to some of the best. And you take a look at the teams that took steps forward. The Flyers, the Penguins. Who saw that coming? They found a way to get it done. The Capitals have got to find a way to get it done. And, it was Dan Muse, the change, replacing Sullivan. And people thought, well, what kind of change was that going to make? A big change, right? That I don't think Carberry needs to change, but I think that the philosophies and the coaching ideas of this team need to change, and maybe some different faces behind the bench. I think Carbs is safe. But other than that, I would be willing to explore other options. All right, so coming up here after the break, the Ovechkin question changes everything. I'll discuss straight ahead, right here. If you've got a sweet tooth like I do, you know how tough it is to find that perfect treat with all that sugar. That's why Cotton Candy 5-Hour Energy Shot brings that nostalgic flavor back in a whole new way. This is that classic cotton candy taste you remember, but a tasty caffeine boost and zero sugar. It's a quick, easy way to satisfy that sweet craving while keeping things simple on the go. I've always loved cotton candy, but I can't be eating sweets all day, and I think if you're like me, you can relate to that. This is a perfect alternative. The flavor really does bring that throwback fruity vanilla vibe, and it's surprisingly smooth. So bring on the sweetness with Cotton Candy 5-Hour Energy Shots, available online at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. All right, welcome back into this afternoon edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So in the final segment, we're talking about the Ovechkin question changes everything, because the big takeaway in the final segment of today's show is everything this offseason hinges on Ovi's decision. Because let's go here. This is the one, right? The question. The weight hanging over everything. Is this it? After that 2-1 win over the Jackets, Ovi says, quote, "I hope it's not my last game. I don't know what's going to happen," unquote. And man, that hits, because for 2 decades, 20 years, there's been one constant. Ovechkin is the Capitals. And now, even he doesn't know, or that's what he's telling us. He's meeting with Spencer Carberry, Chris Patrick, Brian McClellan, his family. And the organization reportedly wants clarity before the draft. But here's the thing. They're not pushing him. Quote via ESPN, they feel like he's earned the right to call his shot, unquote. And yeah, obviously, but let's talk impact. If Ovi returns, you're still competitive. You still have identity. You still have a draw, a culture anchor. But that kind of flies in the face of what Ovechkin said. He didn't want the farewell tour. If he comes back for one more year, he will have a farewell tour from beginning to end. If he leaves, though, everything changes. Leadership shifts, power play identity resets, marketing, fan energy, everything. And, maybe most importantly, the emotional core of this franchise is gone. You heard the fans. One more year, and honestly, that might be the smartest path. Give him a proper send-off, not that he wants one. A retooled system, a final run with meaning, because Tuesday night, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt unfinished, like, all of a sudden we jumped off the train. And I'll say this, just my take, hockey rarely gives you perfect endings, but this one might still have one left. Maybe. It's up to Ovi, right? That's all we know right now. And that's where we're at, kind of state of the Capitals. And this is your only daily, year-round Capitals podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on this afternoon edition. And if you haven't done so, subscribe, follow, wherever you find your podcasts. Also on YouTube. I got you guys covered all summer long. Keep it here to Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. And I'll talk to you again next time.